Maria wiped sweat from her brow. The grand, sprawling estate of Mrs. Albright was a world away from her small apartment, a world she was now responsible for keeping spotless. It was a new job, a chance to make a better life for herself and her daughter Sophia. Every day, after school let out, Sophia would join her mother, quietly doing her homework in a corner of the vast kitchen, or sometimes, if Maria was in an empty part of the house, reading a book nearby. Sophia, at 10 years old, was a bright, curious girl with eyes that took in everything. Mrs. Albright, the owner of this mansion, was a woman of precise habits and even more precise expectations. Her voice, though never loud, carried a certain edge that made Maria always feel slightly on guard. Mrs. Albright was obsessed with appearances, with her place in society, and with making sure everything around her reflected her elevated status. Lately, the house had been buzzing with a new kind of energy. Mrs. Albright's daughter, who lived out of state, was visiting with her newborn baby, a tiny bundle that seemed to command everyone's attention. One afternoon, Maria was scrubbing the marble floors in the main hallway. The rhythmic swish of her mop, a steady counterpoint to the quiet hum of the house. Sophia, having finished her math homework, was supposed to be reading in the kitchen, but a faint, insistent cry had drawn her away. It was the baby, whimpering softly from a room down the hall. Sophia, with her natural empathy, couldn't ignore it. She tiptoed down the hallway, peeking into the open door of a lavish nursery. The room was decorated in soft blues and whites, filled with expensive toys and a grand crib. The baby, swaddled in a delicate blanket, was stirring, a tiny frown on its face, a soft cry escaping its lips. Sophia's heart went out to the little one. Without thinking, she stepped inside. She moved deliberately, not wanting to startle the infant. Reaching into the crib, she gently lifted the baby, holding it close to her chest. The baby, feeling the warmth and the gentle sway, quieted almost immediately, its small hand gripping Sophia's finger. Sophia smiled, a pure, innocent smile, as she rocked the baby softly, murmuring soothing words. It was at that exact moment that Mrs. Albright walked in. She had been on her way to check on her grandchild, expecting to find the infant asleep or perhaps fussing in the crib. Instead, she found Sophia, the maid's daughter, holding the baby. Mrs. Albright's eyes widened, her face instantly turning a shade of angry red. Her mouth dropped open, but no words came out at first. She just stared, a picture of horror and disbelief. Then a harsh gasp escaped her lips. "What in the world do you think you're doing?" she shrieked, her voice sharp and cutting. "Put that baby down, right now!" Sophia flinched, startled by the sudden loud noise. The baby, sensing the tension, began to wail again, louder this time. Sophia tried to explain, her voice small and shaky. "She was crying, Mrs. Albright. I just wanted to help." But Mrs. Albright wasn't listening. Her mind had already jumped to the worst possible conclusion. "Help? You were helping yourself, more like it. What kind of scheme is this? Get away from my grandchild." She snatched the baby from Sophia's arms, holding it protectively. Maria, hearing the commotion, rushed into the nursery, her heart pounding. "Mrs. Albright, what's wrong? Sophia, what happened?" Mrs. Albright turned her fury on Maria. "What's wrong?" "Your daughter, that's what's wrong. I found her holding the baby. Who knows what she was planning? This is outrageous. I knew I shouldn't have trusted you people." Maria felt a cold dread creep over her. "No, Mrs. Albright, you don't understand. Sophia would never. She's a good girl. She just wanted to comfort the baby." "Comfort?" Mrs. Albright scoffed, her eyes narrowing. Or steal. Or ransom. I've heard stories. You think I don't know how these things happen? She clutched the baby tighter, as if Sophia was still a threat. I will not tolerate this. Not in my house. Not with my grandchild. Maria tried again, her voice pleading. Please, Mrs. Albright. She meant no harm. She's only 10. She loves babies. But Mrs. Albright had already pulled out her phone. Her fingers flew across the screen, her gaze fixed on Maria and Sophia with an expression of pure disdain. I'm calling the police, she declared, her voice firm and unwavering. This is unacceptable. This is a crime. Maria's blood ran cold. The police? Mrs. Albright, please, don't do this. It's a mistake, a misunderstanding. Mrs. Albright ignored her, already speaking into the phone, her words a distorted version of what had truly happened. Yes, I need an officer. My grandchild. A child. I found her holding my grandchild. I believe she was attempting to kidnap the baby. Yes, the maid's daughter. She's still here. Please send someone immediately. Sophia, tears welling in her eyes, clung to her mother's side. The entire situation felt surreal, terrifying. Maria held her daughter close, trying to soothe her, but her own hands were shaking. She couldn't believe this was happening. Within minutes, the wail of sirens pierced the quiet afternoon. A police car pulled up the long driveway, its flashing blue and red lights painting streaks across the manicured lawn. Officer Miller, a man with a tired but observant face, stepped out of the vehicle. He had seen a lot in his years on the force, and a call about a maid's daughter trying to kidnap a baby in a mansion usually meant there was more to the story than met the eye. He walked into the house, led by a frantic Mrs. Albright, who immediately launched into her version of events. Officer, thank goodness you're here. This child, this little girl, she was holding my grandchild. I caught her red-handed. She was trying to take the baby. Officer Miller looked at Sophia, who was now openly weeping into her mother's skirt. He then looked at Maria, whose face was a mask of distress and disbelief. Ma'am, he said, addressing Mrs. Albright calmly, can you tell me exactly what happened? From the beginning. Mrs. Albright puffed out her chest, eager to tell her tale. I came into the nursery, and there she was, holding my daughter's baby, a complete stranger, just touching my grandchild. It's a clear case of attempted kidnapping, officer, or theft. Who knows what else she's capable of? Maria stepped forward, her voice trembling but resolute. Officer, please. It's not like that. My daughter, Sophia, she heard the baby crying. She went in to comfort her. She's a sweet, kind girl. She would never hurt anyone. Officer Miller's gaze shifted between the two women, trying to make sense of the conflicting accounts. He could see the fear in Sophia's eyes, the desperation in Maria's, and he could see the unyielding conviction, almost a gleeful certainty, in Mrs. Albright's face. He knew this was going to be a long afternoon. He pulled out his notepad, ready to take statements, but a knot of unease had already begun to form in his stomach. Something here felt wrong, very wrong. Officer Miller, a man who had seen his share of bizarre situations, started his investigation. He knelt down to Sophia's level, speaking in a soft, calm voice. Sophia, still scared, managed to explain, her words coming out in small, shaky bursts. She told him how the baby was crying, how she just wanted to make it feel better, just like she would if it were her little cousin. She explained she didn't mean any harm, her eyes wide and earnest. Officer Miller wrote down her words, observing her carefully. She didn't look like a criminal. She looked like a frightened child. Next, he turned to Maria. Maria, regaining some composure, explained everything from her perspective. She described how she had been working, how Sophia was with her after school, and how Sophia was always gentle and loving with children. She emphasized that Sophia's only intention was to comfort the baby, not to take her. Maria's voice was filled with a mother's worry, her hands clasped tightly together. She pleaded with the officer to understand that this was a terrible misunderstanding, a mistake fueled by Mrs. Albright's assumptions. Mrs. Albright, however, wasn't letting up. She stood by, interjecting with accusations, her voice sharp and insistent. "Officer, don't listen to her sob story. She's trying to manipulate you. This kind of girl, from her background, can't be trusted. They see what we have, and they want it. It's always the same. Press the charges. She needs to learn her lesson." Her words carried a clear undertone of class distinction, painting Sophia and Maria as threats simply because of their social standing. Officer Miller just nodded, continuing to write, but his expression remained unreadable. He had heard this kind of talk before, and it rarely led to the truth. Just as the situation seemed to be at a standstill, another car pulled into the driveway. It was a sleek black sedan, far more expensive than Officer Miller's patrol car. Out stepped a man and a woman. The man was tall, well-dressed, with an air of quiet authority. This was Mr. Maxwell, the baby's father, a tech billionaire known for keeping a low profile despite his immense wealth. Beside him, looking a little pale and tired, was Mrs. Maxwell, still recovering from childbirth. Mrs. Albright's face lit up, a sudden surge of triumph washing over her. "Oh, thank goodness you're here, darling," she exclaimed, rushing over to them. She immediately launched into her dramatic account, pulling them aside, her voice hushed but urgent. "You won't believe what happened. This girl, the maid's daughter, I caught her holding the baby. She was trying to take our grandchild. I had to call the police. It was absolutely terrifying." She gestured wildly towards Sophia and Maria, who stood frozen, watching the scene unfold. Mr. and Mrs. Maxwell looked confused. They exchanged glances, their eyes wide with shock as they took in the police officer, Maria, and the tear-streaked Sophia. Mr. Maxwell, though, didn't react with the immediate outrage Mrs. Albright expected. He simply observed. He looked at Sophia, still clutching her mother's hand, her small face etched with fear, but also a strange sort of innocence. He looked at Maria, whose posture spoke volumes about her distress and desperation. And then he looked at his mother-in-law, Mrs. Albright, whose performance seemed a little too rehearsed, a little too eager. He walked slowly toward Sophia, his gaze steady and calm. Mrs. Albright tried to intervene. "Darling, don't go near her. She's dangerous." But Mr. Maxwell ignored her, his eyes fixed on Sophia. He knelt down, just as Officer Miller had, and spoke in a surprisingly gentle voice. "Hey there," he said. "Why were you holding my baby?" Sophia, startled by the direct question from the baby's father, hesitated for a moment. She glanced at her mother, who gave her a reassuring nod. Then, taking a deep breath, she repeated her simple explanation. "He was crying, sir. Really loud, and nobody was coming. I just wanted to make him stop crying. I just wanted to help him feel better." Her voice was small but clear, filled with a childlike honesty that was hard to ignore. Mr. Maxwell listened, his eyes searching hers. There was no malice, no deceit, just a pure, innocent desire to comfort. Her words resonated with something deep inside him, a quiet understanding that contradicted everything Mrs. Albright had just said. He stood up slowly, his gaze now shifting to Mrs. Albright, a new, thoughtful expression on his face. The seed of doubt had been planted. Mr. Maxwell's eyes narrowed slightly as he looked at Mrs. Albright. The way she had rushed to judgment, the immediate accusation of theft, it just didn't sit right with him. He had seen Sophia's face, heard her simple explanation, and it carried a ring of truth that Mrs. Albright's dramatic performance lacked. He remembered how his mother-in-law often exaggerated things, especially when trying to impress someone or control a situation. This felt like one of those times, but with much higher stakes. "Mother," he said, his voice calm but firm, a tone that always made Mrs. Albright a little nervous. "Are you absolutely certain about what you saw? Did you actually witness Sophia attempting to leave with the baby, or just holding him?" Mrs. Albright stammered, caught off guard by his directness. "Well, I saw her holding him by the nursery window. It looked suspicious, darling. Why else would she be there touching your child? She has no business being in that part of the house, let alone with the baby." She tried to regain her composure, smoothing down her dress. It was clearly a kidnapping attempt, or at least an attempt to take him away. I just know it. Mr. Maxwell just looked at her, a silent challenge in his gaze. He knew his mother-in-law operated on appearances and assumptions, rarely digging deeper. He found himself thinking about Sophia's clear, honest eyes. It was a stark contrast to Mrs. Albright's flustered, defensive posture. The more Mrs. Albright spoke, the less convincing her story became to him. He could almost see the gears turning in her head, trying to construct a narrative that fit her preconceived notions of Maria and Sophia as the help, who couldn't be trusted. Meanwhile, Mrs. Maxwell, still reeling from the shock of seeing police in her mother's home and hearing about an alleged kidnapping attempt, was struggling to process everything. She had just given birth a few weeks ago, and her emotions were still raw. Her mother's words had initially inflamed her fear, making her imagine the worst. She looked at her baby, safe in the arms of Officer Miller, and then back at Sophia, a small, frightened girl. Mrs. Albright's insistence on Sophia being a threat had initially made sense in her postpartum haze of anxiety. "But Mother," Mrs. Maxwell said, her voice shaky, "she's just a child. Are you sure you didn't misunderstand? Maybe she was just trying to help, like she said." The thought of a child her own age being accused of such a serious crime felt wrong, even through her fog of worry. She loved her mother, but she also knew how dramatic Mrs. Albright could be. Mrs. Albright turned to her daughter, a look of exasperation on her face. "Of course, I'm sure, dear. You're just emotional right now. This girl was clearly up to no good. We can't be too careful with our precious little one. You know that." She tried to pull her daughter closer, as if to shield her from the truth she had fabricated. As this conversation unfolded, Officer Miller quietly handed the baby back to Mrs. Maxwell, who instinctively cradled him close. The baby, sensing his mother's presence, let out a soft sigh and snuggled into her chest. Mr. Maxwell, however, wasn't done. He had been looking at Sophia again, specifically at her arm. As she shifted, a small, distinctive birthmark on her inner forearm became visible. It was a faint, star-shaped mark, almost hidden by her sleeve. A jolt went through Mr. Maxwell. He knew that mark. It was a rare, genetic trait that ran in his family, appearing on only a few members, including his own sister and a distant cousin. He had never seen it outside his family before. He felt a sudden, inexplicable pull toward Sophia. His mind raced, trying to put pieces together. He remembered a brief, intense relationship he'd had years ago, before he met Mrs. Maxwell. It was with a woman named Maria. He hadn't thought about her in ages, had assumed she'd moved on, perhaps married. The connection was startling. He turned to Maria, who was still standing protectively beside Sophia, her face pale with worry. His voice was softer now, almost hesitant. "Maria," he began, "I apologize if this is out of line, but Sophia's father, could you tell me anything about him?" Maria's eyes widened, a flicker of surprise and something else, perhaps fear, perhaps old pain, crossing her face. She looked at Sophia, then back at Mr. Maxwell, her heart pounding. The question was so unexpected, so direct after all these years. She hadn't thought about him in a long time. Not in this way. She had built a life for herself and Sophia, a quiet existence where the past was rarely discussed. She took a deep, shaky breath, her gaze dropping to the floor. "Her father, he was a good man," she started, her voice barely a whisper. "But he left before I knew I was pregnant. We were young, and things were complicated. He didn't know about Sophia. I never told him." She paused, collecting her thoughts. "His name was David." Mr. Maxwell's breath hitched. David. That was his name. He was David Maxwell. He felt a cold wave wash over him. Then a warmth, a strange mix of emotions. The birthmark, Maria's story, the name. It was all clicking into place with terrifying speed. Sophia wasn't just a maid's daughter. She was his daughter. The realization hit him with the force of a physical blow. The little girl he had just seen, accused of trying to steal his baby, was, in fact, his own flesh and blood. The implication of this truth, here, now, in front of everyone, was almost too much to bear. His entire world felt like it had just been turned upside down. Mr. Maxwell stood there, a statue carved from disbelief and dawning realization. The name Maria had uttered, David, echoed in his ears, a stark, undeniable confirmation. His name, the birthmark on Sophia's arm, the vague details Maria had given about a fleeting relationship years ago. Everything snapped into place with chilling precision. Sophia was not just a maid's daughter. She was his daughter. The little girl he had just watched being accused, humiliated, was a part of him, a truth he had been completely unaware of until this very moment. A profound emotional shift swept over him, from the concern he'd felt for his newborn to an overwhelming shock, mixed with a sudden, fierce sense of responsibility for Sophia. The air in the opulent living room seemed to thicken, heavy with the weight of this unforeseen revelation. Mrs. Albright, sensing a shift in the atmosphere she couldn't quite grasp, saw Mr. Maxwell's stunned expression and Maria's pale face. She tried to reassert control, her voice sharp. "What is all this nonsense?" "David, darling, what are you talking about? This woman is clearly trying to distract from her daughter's actions. Don't let her pull you into some sob story." She waved a dismissive hand, attempting to brush away the uncomfortable truth that was beginning to unfurl. "It's absurd, a misunderstanding, a ridiculous claim. Let's just deal with the matter at hand, which is this child's misconduct." Her voice, usually so commanding, now had an almost desperate edge to it, a frantic attempt to shut down a narrative that threatened to unravel her carefully constructed reality. But Mr. Maxwell barely heard her. His eyes were fixed on Sophia, then on Maria. The conviction in his gut was growing stronger with every passing second. He knew it. He didn't need a DNA test. The pieces fit too perfectly, too painfully. He took a step forward, his gaze unwavering, as he looked directly at Maria. "Is it true?" he asked, his voice low, filled with a mixture of accusation and a dawning, terrible grief for lost time. "Is Sophia, is she my daughter?" Maria looked up, her eyes brimming with unshed tears. She nodded slowly, a single tear tracing a path down her cheek. "Yes, she whispered, her voice barely audible. She is. The single word hung in the air, a bombshell dropping into the quiet elegance of the room. Mrs. Albright gasped, a sound of pure outrage and disbelief. What? This is preposterous. David, you can't possibly believe this woman. This is an outrageous lie, a scheme to get money. Her face was a mask of fury, her attempts to regain control now bordering on frantic. She tried to pull her daughter, Mrs. Maxwell, away, whispering urgently, "Don't listen to her, darling. She's making it all up." Mrs. Maxwell, who had been listening in stunned silence, felt her world tilt. Her mother's words, usually so reassuring, now sounded hollow and shrill. She looked at her husband, his face a canvas of shock and recognition. Then she looked at Sophia, the innocent girl who had just been holding her baby, and then at Maria, whose quiet dignity in the face of accusation was now tinged with a profound sadness. A wave of betrayal washed over her, followed by confusion, and then a dawning, horrifying understanding. Her husband, her seemingly perfect husband, had a child she knew nothing about, and that child was standing right here, accused by her own mother. Her eyes darted between her husband and Maria, a silent question forming on her lips. Her world, which had seemed so stable and predictable just moments ago, was now a whirlwind of chaotic emotions. She felt the weight of her newborn in her arms, a stark contrast to the 10-year-old girl who was now revealed to be her husband's daughter. The implications were immense, stretching far beyond the confines of this room, touching every aspect of her life, her marriage, her future. She looked at Sophia again, seeing her not as an intruder, but as a potential sister to her own child, a child who had been denied a father for a decade. The realization was a bitter pill to swallow, yet undeniable. Mr. Maxwell's eyes, still wide with disbelief, finally tore away from Maria and landed on Sophia. He knelt down, his billionaire status and all the power that came with it suddenly irrelevant. He looked at Sophia, really looked at her, searching for something, anything, that would confirm what Maria had just said. He saw the same curve of her nose, the familiar shape of her eyes, a slight dimple when she almost smiled. It was all there. A rush of emotions hit him. Regret for the lost years, a flicker of anger for not knowing, and an overwhelming sense of connection to this little girl he had just met. "Why, Maria?" he asked, his voice low and strained, still kneeling before Sophia. He didn't shout, didn't accuse in the way Mrs. Albright had. His tone was more of a plea, a desperate need to understand. "Why didn't you tell me? All these years? Why did you keep her from me?" Maria's shoulders sagged. She finally met his gaze, her own eyes filled with a mixture of pain and raw honesty. "It wasn't that simple, David," she began, her voice trembling slightly. "When I found out I was pregnant, you were gone. You were already back in the States, building your empire. I was just a girl from a small village, working to send money home. I thought you wouldn't want to be involved. I thought I would be a burden. I was scared. Scared of what you would say, scared of how you would react. I didn't have much, but I had my dignity, and I wanted to protect Sophia. I wanted to give her a life, even if it was just me and her." She paused, taking a shaky breath. "I thought about reaching out many times. I saw your name in the news, saw how successful you became. But then I felt even more intimidated. What could I offer? What could Sophia offer to a man like you? I didn't want to be seen as someone trying to take advantage. I just wanted to raise my daughter in peace, to provide for her, even if it meant doing it all on my own. Her words hung heavy in the air, a testament to years of struggle and silent sacrifice. Mrs. Albright, who had been sputtering in the background, finally found her voice again. "This is an elaborate scheme. A gold digger. That's what she is. Trying to extort money from you, David. Don't fall for this sob story." She pointed a trembling finger at Maria, her face a mottled red. "Look at her. She's clearly practiced this. She's a professional manipulator." Officer Miller, who had been observing the entire exchange with a growing sense of unease, stepped forward slightly. "Mrs. Albright," he said, his voice firm, "I think it's clear this situation is far more complex than a simple accusation of theft. Your original complaint appears to be unfounded." He gave her a pointed look, signaling that her attempts to control the narrative were now completely failing. Mrs. Albright's face crumpled. Her carefully constructed facade of authority was cracking, revealing the desperate, insecure woman underneath. Her social standing, her reputation within her elite circle, everything she valued, was crumbling around her. She looked at her daughter, Mrs. Maxwell, hoping for some support, some affirmation, but Mrs. Maxwell's gaze was fixed on her husband and Maria, a silent, internal battle raging behind her eyes. Mrs. Maxwell was still reeling from the shock. Her mind raced, trying to reconcile the man she married with the man who had a hidden child. The betrayal was a sharp, stinging pain, but as she listened to Maria's explanation, a different emotion began to surface. She saw the genuine pain in Maria's eyes, the quiet strength that had allowed her to raise Sophia alone. She looked at Sophia, who was now clinging to her mother's hand, her small face etched with confusion and a hint of fear. The child had done nothing wrong. She was an innocent bystander, caught in the crossfire of adult secrets and prejudices. The thought of her own mother's malicious accusations, the way she had treated Sophia and Maria, now filled Mrs. Maxwell with a profound sense of shame. Her mother had been so quick to judge, so quick to assume the worst, all based on social standing and prejudice. She had been blinded by her own biases, and in doing so, had almost caused irreparable harm to an innocent child and her mother. The baby in her arms stirred, letting out a soft sigh, and Mrs. Maxwell looked down at her own child, then back at Sophia. The thought that her baby could have been treated with such cruelty, simply for being different, or for being in the wrong place at the wrong time, was a chilling one. She realized, with a heavy heart, that her mother's actions were not just misguided, they were cruel, and she had, by her silence, been complicit. She had allowed her mother's prejudice to dictate her initial reaction, to cloud her judgment. Now, as the truth unfolded, she saw the stark contrast between her mother's venom and Maria's quiet dignity. Her husband, David, was looking at Sophia with a depth of emotion she had never seen before. A new dynamic was forming in front of her eyes, one that she had to acknowledge, one that she had to accept. The initial hurt of her husband's secret was still there, a dull ache, but it was slowly being overshadowed by a growing sense of empathy for Maria and Sophia, and a deep disappointment in her own mother. She knew, in that moment, that things could never go back to the way they were. A line had been crossed, and she had to choose which side she was on. Mrs. Maxwell took a deep breath, the air thick with unspoken words and shattered assumptions. She looked from her mother, whose face was now a mask of defeat and anger, to Maria, who stood tall despite her obvious exhaustion, and then to Sophia, a child caught in a storm not of her making. The baby in her arms stirred again, and Mrs. Maxwell gently bounced her, a wave of protectiveness washing over her. She knew what she had to do. This wasn't about her mother's pride or her own initial shock. This was about right and wrong, about fairness, and about two innocent people who had been wrongly accused. She stepped forward, moving away from her mother, a clear signal of her decision. Her voice, though still a little shaky, was firm. "Maria, Sophia," she began, looking directly at them. "I am so incredibly sorry. For everything. For my mother's accusations, for my own silence, and for not seeing the truth sooner." Her gaze flickered to her mother for a brief moment, a silent message of disapproval. No child should ever be treated this way, and no mother should have to endure what you have today. She extended a hand towards Maria, a gesture of genuine remorse and a plea for understanding. Maria, surprised by the unexpected apology, hesitated for a moment before taking her hand, a flicker of hope in her eyes. Mrs. Maxwell then knelt down slightly, getting closer to Sophia's level. "Sophia," she said, her voice softer now, "you were so brave. You just wanted to help, and that was a kind thing to do." She offered a small, reassuring smile. "Please know that I believe you. We all do." Sophia, still a little wary, offered a tiny nod, her grip on her mother's hand loosening slightly. This act of empathy, this genuine apology from someone who had initially been an adversary, began to chip away at the wall that had formed between the two women. It wasn't just words. It was the sincerity in Mrs. Maxwell's eyes. The way she held her own baby close while speaking to Sophia, that made the difference. Mr. Maxwell watched his wife, a sense of relief washing over him. He had been so focused on the shock of finding his daughter, on the anger towards Mrs. Albright, that he hadn't fully considered the impact on his wife. Her strength, her compassion in this moment, only deepened his respect for her. He walked over to Maria and Sophia, placing a reassuring hand on Maria's shoulder. "Maria," he said, his voice softer than before, "I understand why you didn't tell me. I truly do. But I want you to know. I want to be a part of Sophia's life. Both of your lives. I want to make up for lost time, for the years I wasn't there." He looked at Sophia, a profound sense of paternal love already taking root. "Sophia, I'm your father, and I promise I will always be there for you now." He then turned to Mrs. Albright, his earlier anger returning, but now tempered with a quiet resolve. "Mother," he said, his voice cold and unwavering, "your behavior today is unacceptable. Your prejudice, your baseless accusations, have caused immense pain and damage. I will not tolerate it. Maria and Sophia are family now, and I expect you to treat them with the respect they deserve, or you will not be a part of our lives." The words hung heavy in the air, a definitive statement that left no room for argument. Mrs. Albright, pale and defeated, could only stare back, her power completely stripped away. Officer Miller, who had been observing the dramatic turn of events, finally cleared his throat. "Mrs. Albright," he stated, his tone official, "given the circumstances and the clear lack of evidence supporting your initial complaint, no charges will be filed against Maria or Sophia. I suggest you reflect on your actions today." He then turned to Maria and Sophia, a much gentler expression on his face. "I apologize for any distress this has caused. We'll be leaving now." He gave Mr. Maxwell a nod, a silent acknowledgement of the difficult, but ultimately just resolution. Mrs. Albright stood alone, her shoulders slumped, watching her daughter, son-in-law, and the Maid's family now standing together, a unit she had tried to tear apart. Her own daughter, Mrs. Maxwell, had chosen to stand with them, a clear and painful rejection of her mother's prejudice. The lavish estate, once her fortress of status and control, now felt empty and cold. The silence that followed the police's departure was deafening, filled only with the echo of her own ruined judgment. She had lost more than just an argument. She had lost her daughter's respect, her son-in-law's regard, and any semblance of moral authority. Mrs. Maxwell, holding her baby, looked at her mother one last time. There was no anger now, just a deep sadness. She knew a significant shift had occurred, a chasm created that might never fully close. But her focus was on the future, on the family she was building, a family that now included Sophia and Maria. She turned back to her husband, Maria and Sophia, a faint, hopeful smile touching her lips. The path ahead wouldn't be easy, but they would navigate it together. Mr. Maxwell, true to his word, immediately began discussing plans with Maria to ensure Sophia's well-being and education. He spoke of proper legal steps to acknowledge Sophia, of setting up a trust fund for her future, and of regular visits. Maria, still processing the whirlwind of emotions, listened intently, a sense of relief and gratitude washing over her. For the first time in a long time, she felt a glimmer of hope for a brighter future, not just for herself, but for her daughter, Sophia, who now had a father who wanted to be in her life. The air in the room, once thick with tension, now held the fragile promise of new beginnings. Mr. Maxwell wasted no time. The very next day, he started making arrangements to integrate Sophia into their lives. It wasn't about simply throwing money at the situation. It was about genuine connection. He spent hours talking with Sophia, not about school or what she wanted to be when she grew up, but about her favorite colors, what made her laugh, and the small, everyday things that made up her world. He learned about her love for drawing and how she imagined stories for the characters she created. He introduced her to his library, a vast room filled with books, and watched with a quiet smile as Sophia's eyes lit up. He wasn't pushy, just present, letting Sophia set the pace. Sophia, who had always been a little reserved, slowly began to open up. The initial shyness gave way to curiosity, then to genuine comfort. She found herself telling him about her dreams, things she had never really voiced to anyone else. It felt safe, like a secret garden she was finally allowed to share. Mr. Maxwell listened with an attentiveness that made her feel truly seen. He wasn't just hearing words. He was understanding her. He took her to museums, not the stuffy, boring kind, but ones with interactive exhibits that sparked her imagination. He enrolled her in an art class, noticing her talent, and Sophia bloomed under the encouragement. Mrs. Maxwell, after the initial shock had settled, became an active and crucial part of this new dynamic. She approached Sophia with warmth and sincerity, making sure Sophia felt welcomed and valued, not like an outsider or an obligation. She remembered her own mother's coldness and made a conscious effort to be the opposite. She showed Sophia around the house, not as a guest, but as a member of the family. She helped Sophia pick out new clothes, not fancy designer items, but comfortable, age-appropriate outfits that Sophia actually liked. They baked cookies together, and Mrs. Maxwell taught Sophia how to play a simple tune on the piano. These small gestures built a bridge between them, proving that the family was growing, not just in numbers, but in heart. Mrs. Maxwell's acceptance was a powerful force, making the transition smoother for everyone. She often found herself smiling, watching her husband and Sophia interact, a quiet joy settling in her own heart. Maria's life, too, had undergone a dramatic shift. The constant worry about money the endless struggle to make ends meet, had been lifted. She no longer worked for Mrs. Albright, a relief she hadn't fully realized until she was free of it. Mr. Maxwell had insisted she take time for herself to figure out what she wanted to do. He offered to support her while she explored new paths. Maria, always resourceful, decided to pursue an old dream: to become a certified child care provider. She enrolled in courses, her mind buzzing with newfound possibilities. She still lived in her modest apartment, but it no longer felt like a burden. It felt like a home, a place of peace. Her relationship with Mr. Maxwell matured into a respectful co-parenting partnership. They discussed Sophia's schooling, her interests, and her emotional well-being, always putting Sophia first. There was no awkwardness, only a shared commitment to their daughter. Maria found herself admiring his calm strength and his genuine care for Sophia. She saw the good man he was, a man she had been too young and scared to recognize fully all those years ago. The baby, little Leo, became an unexpected focal point, a tiny symbol of their blended family. Sophia adored her half-brother. She loved holding him, gently rocking him when he fussed, and making silly faces to get him to giggle. She would sit for long stretches, just watching him sleep, a protective and loving expression on her face. For Leo, Sophia was just another familiar, loving face in his world. He'd reach out tiny hands to her, gurgling with delight. His presence seemed to solidify the bonds between everyone, a tangible reminder of the family they were all building together. He was a constant source of joy and a gentle anchor, reminding them that new life brought new beginnings. The house, once a quiet, almost sterile place, now echoed with the sounds of children's laughter and the gentle murmur of conversations. It was alive, vibrant, and filled with a warmth it hadn't known before. The once imposing estate now felt like a home, a place where different lives had come together, forming something stronger and more beautiful than any of them could have imagined. Sophia, once a quiet and somewhat isolated child, was now part of a bustling, loving family, finding her voice and her place in a world that had suddenly grown much larger and more welcoming. She was surrounded by love, a feeling she had only ever known from her mother, but now extended to a father, a stepmother, and a baby brother. This new dynamic was still unfolding, but the foundation was solid, built on understanding, forgiveness, and a shared future. The legal part of the whole mess was handled quickly and quietly. Officer Miller, who had seen the entire situation unfold, made sure no charges were filed against Maria or Sophia. He officially closed the case, noting it as a misunderstanding fueled by Mrs. Albright's false accusations. He even took a moment to express his apologies to Maria, feeling bad that they had been put through such an ordeal. He shook her hand, a silent acknowledgement of the injustice they had faced, and wished them well. It was a small gesture, but it meant a lot to Maria, showing that not everyone in authority was blind to the truth. The police report reflected the true nature of events, clearing Sophia's name entirely. Mrs. Albright, on the other hand, faced a different kind of justice. Her social standing, once her most prized possession, began to crumble. Word traveled fast in their exclusive community, and the story, though slightly hushed, became a cautionary tale. People started seeing her for who she truly was: prejudiced, petty, and quick to judge. Invitations to her once frequent charity galas and exclusive club meetings became fewer and farther between. Her phone, which used to ring constantly with social engagements, now remained silent for long stretches. She found herself increasingly isolated, a pariah in the very circles she had so desperately tried to impress. Her own daughter, Mrs. Maxwell, maintained a polite but firm distance. The betrayal and the sheer meanness of her mother's actions had created a rift that seemed impossible to mend. Their conversations were brief and formal, centered only on the grandchild, Leo. There were no more shared confidences, no more comfortable silences. Mrs. Albright was left to contend with the consequences of her prejudice, a lonely figure in her grand, empty mansion, a stark contrast to the bustling, joyful home her daughter now shared with her new, expanded family. It was a bitter pill for her to swallow, realizing that her own actions had alienated the very people she claimed to love and protect. The silence in her home was deafening, a constant reminder of her fall from grace. Sophia thrived in her new environment. The initial shyness slowly faded, replaced by a blossoming confidence. She was no longer the quiet girl who felt like an outsider. With Mr. Maxwell's encouragement and the steady support of Maria and Mrs. Maxwell, she excelled academically. Her grades improved dramatically, and she discovered a passion for science, spending hours in the home's well-stocked library and even setting up small experiments in a corner of her room. She joined the school's debate club, finding her voice and learning to articulate her thoughts with clarity and conviction. She made new friends, children who saw her for her intelligence and kindness, not her background. She learned to ride horses, a hobby she shared with Mr. Maxwell, and together they explored the sprawling estate, forging a deep and unbreakable bond. Her laughter, once rare and soft, now echoed through the house, bright and full of life. She found a sense of belonging she had never truly experienced before, a feeling of being completely and utterly loved for who she was. The Maxwell family, now larger and more complex, found a new equilibrium. It wasn't always easy. Blending two families, each with its own history and habits, required patience and understanding, but they approached it with open hearts. Mr. Maxwell continued to be a pillar of strength, guiding them all with his quiet wisdom. Mrs. Maxwell, once a woman who might have struggled with such an unexpected change, embraced her new role with grace and warmth. She became a true stepmother to Sophia, offering guidance and love without trying to replace Maria. The two women, Maria and Mrs. Maxwell, developed a unique friendship, built on mutual respect and their shared love for Sophia. They often met for coffee, discussing Sophia's progress, or simply sharing stories about their lives. It was an unconventional family, perhaps, but one built on a foundation of genuine affection and a commitment to each other's well-being. The story of how Sophia came to be part of their family became a powerful message within their lives. It was a constant reminder of the unexpected turns life could take, the importance of looking beyond superficial judgments, and the enduring power of empathy. It taught them that family wasn't just about blood, but about connections forged through understanding, forgiveness, and unconditional love. They learned that kindness, even in the face of prejudice, could transform lives. Sophia, the little girl who had once been accused of a crime she didn't commit, became the heart of their blended family, a testament to resilience and the capacity for new beginnings. Her journey from a struggling maid's daughter to a cherished member of a loving family underscored the idea that true wealth lay not in material possessions, but in the richness of human connection. The house, once a symbol of Mrs. Albright's rigid social climbing, was now filled with the vibrant energy of a family that defied conventional definitions, proving that love could indeed conquer all, creating a future brighter and more inclusive than anyone could have imagined. They were a family, not by accident, but by choice, bound by a love that transcended their pasts and promised a beautiful, shared future.